to till. Where I plant, and I have my own share of weeds too. I'm not gonna begin to pretend I don't. But when I get ready to plant the tomatoes or peppers or warm weather things, I just go along and I dig the one little hole. I spread some compost and come to the vegetable seminar next time and tell you all about that. But I'm working up the soil in an area this big instead of the area that's that big, you know, that gets occupied by the plant. And when I'm doing row crops, whether I'm planting, you know, radish seed or lettuce seed or something like that, I'll drag that one little furrow down. So again, I'm disturbing the soil in a very narrow band, and I've put compost on top of it, which is going to smother most of the weed seeds that I bring up. If you go through and till it up, man, you're looking for more weeds than you have ever seen. Yes?
Yeah, my neighbor wanted me to ask you
Very good. Pass
if turning over with a pitchfork and tilling, is that the same thing?
Turning with a pitchfork is kind of less efficient tilling, but it's doing the same thing. It's doing two bad things, actually. It's bringing up the weed seed so they can sprout. The second thing, all that organic material that's in the soil, that's what we want to build and maintain. When we get it up on top of the soil, it oxidizes. It turns to carbon dioxide and a few other things, and it goes away. That's why, again, you know, so many parts of this country that have been in agriculture for 100, 150 years now, the soils are just horrible. If they don't dump, you know, 2-3 tons of fertilizer on an acre of ground, they can't grow anything. And the sad thing is that every year it gets worse and worse and worse, and the crops that are produced from it have less and less and less nutrient in it. And it's part of it is the bringing the organic material up to the surface where it oxidizes. The other part is the reaction that the chemical fertilizer causes, which burns the material out. Our soils in the Rio Grande Valley back at the turn of the last century were up to 6% organic material. And everybody knows that, you know, a few years back, the Rio Grande Valley grew the best citrus in the world. And the quality really went downhill. There's not a lot of citrus grown in the valley anymore. And the reason is that the organic content of the soil is now less than 1/2 of 1% instead of the 6%. And the quality of nutrition from the citrus as well as many of the crops is much, much lower. There are a number of groves in the valley now that are 100% organic that are producing the best tasting, the most nutritious, and the most expensive citrus that has ever been produced. You know, if you want to make somebody happy, and it's certainly no secret, I have, as many of you all know, every summer or two I go up to Wyoming for a little backpacking and horse packing, and to be sure that I'm welcome the next summer, I send these folks a bunch of valley citrus every Christmas, and then they're real happy to see me come whenever I can get up there. And truly, if you're dealing with some of the organic producers down there, man, it's the best citrus in the world. But it's...
How do you get it?
What's that?
I've never seen it for sale here.
It's pretty much something you do online. You won't see it for sale here. Call Malcolm Beck. He will tell you who the best producer is down there right now. I'm going to be down there speaking to one of their conferences in January, and I'll probably come back with some citrus and some answers, but Malcolm can tell you anytime you want to call. Yes, sir.
All right, tilling's bad, so what about aeration? Aerating the soil?
Aerating is good exercise. It doesn't really accomplish anything because you know, what you're trying to do is loosen the soil so you get more oxygen into it. You get the same aerating effect by putting a layer of compost on the surface and watering. But, you know, if you want to get out and run that core aerifier around, and if you're going to aerify, and, you know, some people recommend it, and matter of fact, if Saws was giving you that rebate if you put down compost this year, but then you had to aerify as well. Aerifying was a waste of time, but if you had to do it, always use what is called a core aerifier. There are two types of aerifiers. One is what we call a core aerifier. The other is what we call a dibbler. A dibbler is something that if you imagine a spike, a nail, driven into the ground, it punches a hole in the ground. But what does it do? Just like it does if you drive a nail into wood, it pushes the fibers out in all directions. So what you end up when you drive that spike down in and pull it back out, sure, it's made a hole, but it took all the soil and pressed it into this little hard ring. It just pushed it outward and made part of the soil harder. At the same time, it got more oxygen into the soil. A core aerifier is something that has hollow tines, and it rolls over and literally pulls a little core of soil out. That's where the name core aerifier comes from. So, you know, people will buy almost anything. There are people out there selling things that look like golf shoes but with extended spikes on them and telling you to get this and run around the yard. Number one, you're going to break your neck trying to do that. And number two, those are dibblers. You're not accomplishing anything. In fact, you're making, in some ways, making the soil harder, you know, when you're doing that. So you want the ones that actually pull out a core of soil. I haven't seen any shoes that would do that yet, but if somebody wants their new invention, then yeah, figure out how to do that and it'll be a good thing. But no, really, tilling is detrimental and is not necessary. One of the conferences that I went to last January, they had done a bunch of research, and this was done on Rodale's farm up in Pennsylvania. And they were growing, they call them smother crops rather than cover crops. And to cut down on the weeds and build the soil at the same time, what they were doing is growing something like veg or Austrian winter peas or something like that on the soil in the winter, which actually, due to the nature of a legume, puts nutrient back into the soil. And then they were going along and cutting it and crimping it when it was time to plant. And then they were planting their seeds literally down through it. And the cover crop, they actually called it a smother crop, but it was so dense it kept the weeds from sprouting underneath it. They grew a pretty good little patch, 200-300 acres of organic corn this way. They made 2 passes through the field. They went through with their tractor one time, and it's the same process, cut and crimped this winter cover crop and planted the seed. They did not drive through the field again until late summer when they were harvesting the corn. The adjoining acreage, 200 some odd acres over there, one of the universities farms on a chemical basis. This has been sort of the challenge. You guys come over here and you use your best conventional agriculture, and we'll compare it with our organic agriculture. Well, in their 250-acre cornfield, right adjacent to the Rodale farm there, they made, I think, 9 passes through that field with their tractors. They went through to till it, and they went through to disc it, to drag it, to plant it, to cultivate lightly, to keep the weeds down. Anyway, 8 or 9 passes through the field with the tractor versus 2. Now let's talk about energy usage. Do you know how much more oil or diesel it took to go through the field that many times? Let's talk about production. Everybody says, oh, organics, you can't feed the world with that. It doesn't produce. On the retail side, they produced about 1.5 times as much corn per acre. And then they say, well, but you know, you can't get enough of a price to pay for it. The commercial corn sold for $2.40 a bushel. The Rodale farm sold for $9.15 a bushel. And the guy was offered over $10 for it, but had already contracted with somebody else and said, I have to sell it at the price that I've contracted for. So it really does work. No-till agriculture is going to be a thing of the future. I don't think John Deere likes it because you're not going to sell as much material. The chemical don't like it. It's happening anyway. A lot more people are using organic fertilizers because what is